Good morning, everyone. If you've not met me yet, my name's Simon, still relatively new, so I should probably still introduce myself. I used to work as an outdoor instructor for a while, and one of the sports I coached was mountain biking. And there was one time I was with a group, and we'd just gone down this brilliant flowy trail, and we came to a little gap, not very big, a gap in the trail, and it was used for rainwater and stormwater to channel through so it didn't destroy the rest of the path and the trail. And I stopped the group and I said, what we're going to do now is try and jump or bunny hop over this little gap. Now, it's quite safe because if they didn't get their back wheel up or any wheel or only the front wheel, then you could just ride over it. So I set off on a demonstration and I did a couple of pedals in and I lifted the front wheel, lifted the back wheel, and I started to come down. Now, for some reason, I had completely misjudged it. My front wheel went into the gap, the bike stopped instantly, and I flew off and hit a grass verge some distance away. And do you know what was worse? Before I set off, I said, "Watch this." I know. But as Ant said, we are continuing our series in Jesus and his kingdom. And today, we're going to look at who is the greatest in the kingdom. With the group mountain biking, if I'd taken the time to maybe be a little bit more humble, to think clearly, to work out how I was going to do this demonstration properly, instead of showing off, it probably would have ended a little bit better for me. And we're going to look at the three characters in the story, in the passage that was read: the disciples, the child, and Jesus. And the disciples kick things off with this question: who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? What a question. Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Just to give you a bit of context, just before that, in the chapter before, Jesus had told his disciples he was going to be killed. So this is a very, very tactless question. They're thinking, mulling over, maybe I could be in charge next. Maybe I could be the greatest if Jesus is going. What about me? This question is full of pride and arrogance. This is full of self-promotion. And it's so easy, isn't it, to build ourselves up, but often that puts others down. And one-upmanship in conversation, things like, yeah, but I did this. Or even false humility, where we don't really mean what we say, we just want to look good. It was pride and arrogance that got Adam and Eve kicked out of the Garden of Eden. It was said to them, you could be like God. And I imagine their eyes lit up. Ooh, could be like God. That sounds good. And it all went downhill from there for them. When you go through the selection process for ordination, you have to have an interview at a diocese level, at a regional level. They check that what you think about your calling and what your church thinks about your calling lines up with the wider church as well. And there's a couple of stories about me being arrogant, by the way, but I've worked on it. I'm working on it. I felt a call to ordination, and my church agreed, and I was sent to one of these interviews. The problem was, there were loads of lovely people in the church saying to me, yeah, you should do that. You'd be good at that. And I started to believe my own hype. I started to think, they can't help but ordain me. I'm perfect for this. I started to even think, maybe, didn't think it literally, but, started to think I was God's gift to the church. I wasn't, and I'm not, so please don't think that. But basically, I went to this interview, and the answer was, no, you're not ready. You're not ready yet. And I was devastated. And it took me a process of working through my arrogance. getting people around me who could say, oh, you could do better there, or that's wrong. Let's do something different here. Not believing every nice thing, literally, that was said to me. And it took about a year or so, and then I went back and they said, yes, you're ready at this point. But you see, it is difficult for Jesus to work in and through us when there is arrogance, when there is self-promotion in our lives. The disciples were looking for greatness, but they were looking for a greatness on their terms and in the wrong way. But then Jesus brings in a child, and it's really difficult for us to understand quite how radical this was. How earth-shatteringly, I didn't say that very well, did I? How much of an upheaval this would have been to their thinking. You see, a child in that time was almost worthless, was seen on a similar level to a servant or a slave. It wasn't until they reached puberty that when children could maybe help and work a bit or start families, that they were seen as more valuable. And even when children were written about in that time, there was no pronoun for masculine or feminine for a child, no him or her, it was just it. The theologian Tom Wright, interestingly, he says that he thinks, or he likes to think, that Jesus actually got a small toddler, a girl, rather than a boy, just to really hammer home the point. We don't know that for sure, but I think that sounds like something Jesus would do as well. You see, the child is a picture of humility, of complete reliance. Small children and toddlers struggle to feed themselves, to clothe themselves, to look after themselves. They need parents' love and support, physically and emotionally. You see, in Jesus' kingdom, true greatness goes low. True greatness intentionally takes a lower status. And as I said, this would have been just incomprehensible to the disciples, certainly to begin with. And they themselves didn't have very high status from their backgrounds and their professions. But they obviously were thinking, we're with Jesus now, maybe things are on the up. And then Jesus takes the rug from under them. It's hard for our culture to fully grasp this because our culture idolizes children, whether we realize it or not. We often look back fondly on the time when we were carefree and responsibility-free, like a child. TV shows like Peppa Pig and Family Guy, I know nobody's ever put those two together before, but they have adults that are not very capable, and the child is the cleverest in the family. The nearest I can think, in our time, Jesus would be saying, if he was here now, he would say to us, become like a refugee who is crossing the English Channel. Somebody who is utterly helpless, looking for support, looking for loving care, looking for a new start. Imagine Jesus saying this to us. Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like a refugee, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. When I started looking at this passage this week, I thought, oh, become like a child. Sounds nice, doesn't it? It sounds good. But the longer I've been living with the passage, the harder this passage has been hitting me. And the harder it is to actually live in Jesus' words, live out Jesus' words. You see, in Jesus' kingdom, true greatness goes low. It holds back in conversations. It serves, especially when it's inconvenient, and is completely open all areas access to Jesus and the Spirit. You see, humility positions itself low, but also practices low. It's not just wanting to be humble, thinking we're humble. It's actually showing humility, as Jesus did when he washed his disciples' feet, or as we've already thought today, that Jesus left the unimaginable glory of heaven to come to this earth as a penniless, homeless person, ultimately dying for us. You see, Jesus is always the answer, isn't he? It's the Sunday school Bible class answer, Jesus. But it really is in this case. And I love the way that Jesus deals with this, because it doesn't seem like he's exasperated, although maybe he would have been. But he gently, but very firmly and profoundly reframes greatness for the disciples. He takes their concept and turns it upside down. Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Well, Jesus is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Always was, always will be. Again, a little bit of context. In the chapter before, Jesus had gone up a mountain with 3 of his close friends, and he had been transfigured. It looked as if he was bright white and glowing. He was in a heavenly form, and that didn't happen to any of the disciples. And again, in the chapter before that, Peter has said of Jesus, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. He'd made this great claim about how great Jesus was, and now he's implicated in this question and all that it carries with it. It's Jesus who fully embodies the humility of the child, who fully embodies the humility of the refugee. It's Jesus who was the highest, who became the lowest. It's Jesus who should have been using himself as the example. But then again, I guess that wouldn't necessarily be humble. In our house, we love a good Disney Pixar movie, and Cars is one of the favorite of my boys. Lightning McQueen there is a cocky, young racing car who's got the world at his feet, or wheels. But he gets lost and ends up in a backwater town. And it's here that he makes true friends and learns the need for humility. He comes back. This is a whistle-stop tour of the film, by the way. He comes back to the final race of the season, and this is a spoiler if you haven't seen it, so you might want to cover your ears. He comes back to the final race of the season, and instead of winning, he helps a car that is crashed cross the line ahead of him. He gives up being the best to serve. He didn't win, but in Jesus' kingdom, he would have found greatness. Jesus also in this passage has some stark warnings for the disciples, as well as shocking them about the trajectory they should take in terms of their status. He has some warnings about leading other people astray. And it's very easy to hurt one another in church. And it's easy to cause other people to stumble in their faith, to question, and even, God forbid, cause people to move away from faith altogether. Now, Jesus is non-violent. He went to crucifixion without putting up a fight. But in this passage, we have death by drowning, self-mutilation, and eternal fires of hell. And they're there, so we need to think about what it means and why it's there. You see, often when Jesus really wants to make a point, he uses hyperbole and very extreme images to shock his audiences. And he really wants them to remember this. And we really need to take this on board. Because when we're not being humble and when we are being arrogant, when we're being self-promoting, that's when we're more likely to lead others astray or to cause somebody else to stumble in their faith. So a millstone. A millstone was a huge round stone that was pulled by a donkey, and it was to crush grain into flour. And this is such a stark image. If that huge stone was around your neck, there's no way of swimming. And certainly in that time, there had been no way for them to get a body out of the water. And if their body wasn't buried, there was thought at that time there was no peaceful afterlife. Jesus is really shocking his audience into thinking about, if we cause somebody to stumble, this is something huge that we carry around with us. This is something we take with us. So for those of us who lead in any way, this is a massive challenge. But if you distill leadership right down, leadership is about influence. And all of us, whether we think we lead or not, influence people in some way. Kind or harsh words at that simple level influence people. So leaders, we really need to take note about not causing others to stumble. But everybody needs to take note of this too. And if there's something in us that causes others to stumble, we need to try and take care of it. We need to pluck it out or cut it off. That's what's meant by that really stark imagery. Breaking bad habits hurts and takes time. As I mentioned, for me, when I was around that call for ordination and the interview that didn't go so well, it took a bit of time. And it wasn't an easy process to sort out what was wrong in my life and to get things back in order and to approach the interview and approach my calling in a good way. But accountability is so important. Accountability to have loving but honest people who are around us, who are prepared to point us in the right direction if needs be. Whether that's accountability in a small group, in a small prayer group, in a friendship group, or wherever you find your accountability within the church family or within the family of God, that is something that is hugely important. And then there is the eternal fire or hell. Some translations of the Bible translate this differently at the end. And depending what your church background is, some of you may have very fixed ideas about what that means, or some of you might be right now in your seat very, very uncomfortable that I've even mentioned that or it was read. Well, the word in the Bible that's translated here is a word called Gehenna. And Gehenna was and is a literal, real place. And in the Old Testament, this is where people sacrificed children through fire to a god called Molech. And this is where, when Jerusalem was destroyed in the Old Testament, where it burnt. This is where literal fires were set by people. And this is an image of God handing people over to the consequences of their actions. This is people carrying their consequences. This is people living in a hell of their own making. It's very serious if Jesus is taking this really, really seriously if we are causing other people to stumble. But also, this place, Gehenna, in the Old Testament, is where a king called Josiah burnt idols when he was cleansing the nations. And even though there is consequences, Jesus' end goal is to restore us and make us whole. It's not to leave us to wallow in our own suffering. He wants to build us back up, and he wants to restore us. You see, true greatness goes low. The rest of this chapter 18 in Matthew teaches us how we reconcile and forgive each other when things go wrong. But Jesus is very clear. We need to be really, really careful that we are not getting to that position in the first place, that we are not leading other people to stumble. So where do we go with this passage? As I was thinking and praying about it this week, I think there are two things for us. We need to be open to receive from Jesus like a child. We live in a world with so much skepticism and cynicism, particularly around faith. One of the American founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, he took the Bible and he basically cut out every story that had a miracle in it. Every story that wasn't rational, he cut out. It's easy to live with a convenient Jesus that fits into a little box that we bring out when faith is useful to us, but we put away when we're skeptical about whether Jesus can help or not. And I think often, and certainly this is something I am guilty of, is that I'm often skeptical that Jesus will help me when I give up some comfort and security for him. Becoming like that refugee, moving in the opposite direction of culture in terms of status, is difficult. Maybe for others it might be skeptical of God working today, working through miracles, speaking to us, wanting to use us. Or maybe you're somebody here or watching who is skeptical of faith in general. Well, Jesus is waiting open arms to receive you. But we also need to love Jesus and others like a child. The Apostle John wrote, "We love because he, Jesus, first loved us." A child learns to love from their parents, and God so loved the world. We love God and others because of the love shown to us in and through Jesus. A love that is open to everybody. Jesus came and he loved the least and the lost. So how do we show this love to those in church with us and those outside as we go out? And this isn't, in these terms, this isn't something easy. This isn't showing love by giving some money on an app while we're sat on our sofa. This is really, really inconvenient love that Jesus is calling us to show. How far is too far for you and Jesus' kingdom? How far is that? I'm not sure I could serve that way, or I'm not sure I could do that, or I'm not sure I could speak in that setting. Jesus calls us to become like a child, to have the humility of the refugee. You see, true greatness in Jesus' kingdom goes low. True greatness goes low. Do you want to stand, please? Let's just take a moment to reflect on what God may be saying to us. Lord, I pray that whatever is you would be sinking into our hearts by your Spirit, and whatever was just of me, the preacher, would just be blown away, Lord. Holy Spirit, I pray that you would come, that you speak to us and work in our lives, Lord. Show us where we may become more like a child, more like the refugee. Could the prayer team come up and be ready, please? I think God certainly wants to challenge us on our comfort and security, and he wants to push us out of our comfort zones. And maybe something I've said or we've talked about today, sung about, has just been talking to you, has been talking to your conscience about where you could go a bit further, where it is inconvenient for you to go. And if that's you, please do come and get prayer with it today. Maybe coming forward to get prayer is the bit that's a bit inconvenient or out of your comfort zone. Just come and get prayer if that is the case. So we're going to have a song of worship coming through, but if you'd like to come and get prayer, please do so.